My name is Ben Wiener. I describe myself as a professional venture capitalist and an unprofessional author. I manage a small venture capital fund that invests in day zero startup companies. More recently, I published a novel, which we're going to talk about, called Fever Pitch. And it's a teaching tool to entrepreneurs about specifically startup pitching and generally the early stages of the startup life cycle from the perspective of a very troubled founder and entrepreneur and the people around him that he's interacting with.
Welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast. Today my guest is Ben Wiener. Ben is a venture capitalist and an author. He's recently written a book called Fever Pitch, which is all about the story of a founder who gets himself into some scrapes. I think that's fair to say. And we're going to be looking at the journey that founders go through, why their story lands or doesn't land. And we're also going to be tapping into Ben's own journey because that's pretty colourful. And I think some of this is probably a bit autobiographical. So without any further ado, Ben, welcome.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Would you mind telling the audience in 60 seconds to 90 seconds a bit about your history and how you came to write Fever Pitch?
Okay, well, it might take me a little more than 90 seconds, but I'll just place you in my shoes about 6 months ago when Fever Pitch was published, and I'm sitting at my desk and watching it, rise up in the rankings on Amazon. It's getting in the top 100, top 10, top 5, and it ultimately hit number 1 in all 3 categories in which it was published. It's a book about a founder who goes through this very roller coaster journey, which is obviously very extreme. It's meant to be fun and entertaining, but it's also meant to teach what he learns, possibly too late, about what he's got wrong in his startup pitch and what he needs to get right. If you go back 10 years, I was pitching my venture capital fund to investors. I thought I had stumbled across an investment opportunity that was small but interesting in my local market. And I was sure, because of my, I was highly educated, highly credentialed. I never managed anybody's money before, but I thought my passion and my integrity and my insight about this opportunity would carry the day and investors would give me money. And they absolutely did not. I struck out. I was over 27 with my first investors, and 2 investors actually cursed me out during my pitch. I actually got profane, vulgar reactions because it had so bothered people and they couldn't possibly believe that I was right that they cursed me out. So 10 years later, I was a best-selling author on pitch, strategy and structure. So clearly what happened was those interactions caused me to go deep down a rabbit hole of research because I was able to fix my pitch, obviously, and get my fund off the ground. And I still was bothered by, okay, what had I had done so wrong? And what had I then done right to get investors to give me money? And then as an investor, what was I hearing most often from founders that was quote unquote wrong or that wasn't resonating? And what was it about the ones that did resonate structurally that had clicked? And that research took years, probably the last 5 or 6 years. I went probably further down the rabbit hole of anybody who's ever tried to figure out in our little narrow slice of entrepreneurship, is there a structure? Is there a narrative structure of the information that's optimal for the ears or the brain of the investor? I believe there is. I believe I sorted it out, as you would say in the UK. And I then turned that, rather than turning it into a 1,000 word blog post, I turned it into a 250 page full length novel to try to teach this framework that I came up with. So I'll stop there, but that was my journey from total failure to research to insight to publishing and sharing what I believe I figured out with the rest of the entrepreneurial world.
Well, as I look through the book, there are certain things that stand out. I mean, one standout quote is the corporate world is all about telling a good story. You tell a good story, you get ahead. I'm great at stories. One of the characters, Jeff, says.
Yes.
And then I'm curious, how do we get founders to recognize the critical importance of having a story that lands, that resonates, that feels timely, relevant, and investable?
Okay, so I'm glad you pointed that out. And that's in like the very first couple pages of the book. And our protagonist reacts negatively to that because he's anti-story. He's a scientist. He's all about truth. He's all about, telling things straight. And this other character, Jeff, is telling him, yeah, business is all about telling stories. And Jeff is clearly a character and he's good at faking people out. So the whole thing is a setup to try to say, most of us think that story is negative, or many of us, at least in certain contexts, feel that story is like a pejorative, like, oh, he's good at telling stories. Stories are fiction, stories aren't true. And obviously that's a setup in the book because Mark, the protagonist, needs to understand that in many cases, stories are truthful and need to be told in a certain structural way to get people to believe them. Not to be manipulative, but in order to convey truthful, accurate information, you still need to structure it as a classical story architecture or story narrative arc. And that's sort of the journey that we throw him into in the book. So it's meant to shock, it's meant to jar you in the beginning and say, oh yeah, of course, business people tell stories all the time as a negative, but then Mark needs to actually tell a truthful story about his company, and he goes on this journey to try to figure it out. So a lot of us have this negative reaction to storytelling, when in fact, we have always told our stories, our most truthful pitches and our most truthful mechanisms of conveying new information follow a very, very old, since the beginning of humankind, structure of a narrative arc that was probably most famously described by Joseph Campbell in the mid 1900s as the hero's journey. And then we've all kind of taken that structure and used it in screenwriting and book writing. And I'm just taking that structure and translating that into what I believe is the right framework or words for the very narrow slice of entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur telling his or her story to somebody like me who's an investor.
Well, again, anyone who has any doubts about story, you have to remember where humanity has evolved from. We've been spending the last 250,000 years talking about the great emu in the sky, and telling narratives and our oral histories. Um, and story is visceral. It's something you must learn to get good at if you're going to succeed in life generally. Because if you can't tell a good story, then odds are people are just going to switch off. And you look at people like Steve Jobs, who didn't necessarily have a winning personality, but when he developed his story and he launched the iPod and the iPhone, um, he it was transformative. And this was a man who probably changed what, four different market segments irrevocably, because of his skill at storytelling, among other things. But you look at the business world. Great business leaders, great military leaders are the ones who can galvanize other human beings. And we are creatures of emotion. We're creatures of story. And without that, then chances are our message will fall flat and we
Right.
will not be able to find the motivation in others. So, one of the things that the book points out, which I really rather liked as well, was a quote from Mark, which is cutting things out is tough. It feels like you're slashing the limbs off your baby, but it's necessary. The key isn't cramming everything in, it's deciding what to leave out. So can we start with that? Let's work out how we tell a story, but just the relevant parts instead of all the detail.
Right. So let's put our shoes into the shoes of the archetypical entrepreneur who I have deep respect for and is deeply passionate about what she has been working on for the last 12 months or 12 years. It's her life's work. And when she meets somebody like me who's deciding whether or not to invest, she just has incredible motivation and incentive to fire hose everything. Like she's so passionate, and she should be, about what she's solving one of the world's possibly one of the biggest problems or opportunities facing humanity. So clearly that's going to be a lot of information. The problem is that a lot of us are not ready to get that fire hose right away. And we need it sort of dripped in or distilled into its component parts in order for our stupid brains to process it. So too much is too much. And I understand the motivation in trying to cram all that stuff into a short, condensed meeting. And unfortunately, we can't handle it a lot of the time. We, the investors on the other side. So the hard part is like Mark says in the book, is cutting stuff out that is so fundamental to what you're doing and just getting down to the really raw fundamental components. And there are different ways of trying to do that. I've offered a framework to try to get the founder to the five pressure point elements that are critical to mention. Unfortunately, and again, I don't mean any disrespect to founders, but I've been in pitches where the entrepreneur was so busy jamming so much information into the pitch that they actually glossed over what I claim are the five most important pressure points. So it's actually a 55-minute pitch that wasn't a pitch at all because it had tons of information, but it missed the five pressure points that were going to activate, my brain. So I think it's a critical lesson, and it's incredibly difficult. And the point is, the hard things in life are hard, and they're meant to be hard, but they're worth it to do because you're going to get something that's crushing a piece of charcoal into a beautiful diamond, and that's what we're trying to get you to do.
Can you talk us through the model? It's called the heart model for those of you who are interested.
Yeah.
But I'd like Ben to talk us through it.
Okay, so I didn't start off trying to get it into five. I just found five, and then I wedged them into a five-letter acronym that worked well. Four of the letters were easy. The fifth one was a little harder, but I got one that worked. I wanted to give something to people that they could remember and translate into real life. So the HEART, and it works well. It's beautiful, like the heart of the perfect pitch. It's so emotional, right? The heart of the perfect pitch is H, hypothesis. We start with why. And this is, if anybody recognizes that phrase, that's the famous Simon Sinek book, which was the outgrowth of his famous TED Talk, which is one of the most important TED Talks ever in history. Simon Sinek on stage with the golden circle. It's so old that he's using a magic marker and an easel and he's turning big pages of paper, but he's so fundamentally true and correct. every great movement, every great company, every great political movement, every great revolution started with not what they did or how they were doing it, but why, what they believe. And in that TED talk, Sinek uses the word belief or believe, I think, over 30 times. And it's so dead on accurate. So we don't start off the pitch with our vision statement or our mission statement. We start off with our belief statement. We throw down the gauntlet and we say, hi, I'm Ben. I believe that the startup pitch is broken. And I'm projecting belief and also somewhat maybe provocation and controversy potentially. Like you need to now decide whether you are open to believing what I believe or not. But at least I've shown you that I'm taking you on a path. And hopefully over the next 12, 10, 5, 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a lot of evidence to back up what I believe in. So we start with Simon Sinek. We start with why. We start with what I call an H, or a hypothesis, because it fits the algorithm. E, the next step is, and by the way, notice when I begin to talk about what the solution is, it's very, very deep into this. So we set it up. H, we believe. I believe that. I started my company because this is what I believe about the future. Not what I believe religiously, what I believe about this market. That I'm not telling you all my beliefs. I'm telling you what I believe about this thing that I'm about to present to you. Preferably something that's messed up or broken, or alternatively, some big opportunity that's untapped. That's number one, H. E, there's an enormous outcome. There's enormous stakes involved in this problem or opportunity. There's a lot at stake. If you go back to the hero's journey, so I believe that there's a woman tied to the train tracks and there's a train coming, like in the old classic movie. Hey, pay attention. And there's a lot at stake. Like if that train hits her, she's going to die. So I'm getting your attention. Like there's a lot at stake. There's a damsel in distress. You better pay attention. The reason why the outcome needs to be big is because A, we want to attract attention to what we're working on. And B, for people like me who are professional investors, unfortunately, we need big outcomes to be big potential outcomes to be attracted to an investment opportunity. If it's too small, if we perceive that even if it does succeed, it'll be too small, our investors are not paying us fees to invest in small things, they're paying us fees to invest in bigger things. So enormous stakes, both for attention grabbing purposes and for justification of the investment, we need to show the investor very quickly that there's a lot at stake. A, again, still haven't described what I'm going to do. The alternatives are grossly inadequate. The alternatives are terrible. She's tied to the train tracks. I'm standing there. We're standing there together. I don't have a scissors or a knife or anything to get her off of that train tracks. She's in big trouble. The alternatives are all inadequate. I'm not a Boy Scout. I don't know how to untie the ropes. Nothing I have in my toolkit is even close to adequate to solve this situation. The current state of play is totally effed up, totally broken. This is the ideal. We want to set it up so that at this point, the investor's like begging, oh, please, please, where's the hero? Who's going to save us from this terrible situation? And then, of course, finally, the fourth of five, our hero comes riding in on her white horse. She is the radically differentiated, game-changing, paradigm-shifting, order of magnitude different solution. Not just a better solution. She's not just a good hero. She's a great hero. She's got everything we need. She's got the ability to slay the dragon, cut the woman off the train tracks, whatever the problem is. She's got she's got the only thing that can work to save the day. And then finally, T is we finally get to us. Who's building this? We get to not the team, but the traits. The T is for traits and skills of the team. Specifically within the team, do they have the credibility and the ability to be the ones to be the heroic saviors? Do they have the abilities and the credibility to design, build, and sell the solution that they've just told us about in the prior radically differentiated slide? So those are the five things. H, hypothesis, start with why. E, there's a lot at stake, enormous stakes. A, alternatives are terrible, grossly inadequate. R, we have a radically differentiated, game-changing, paradigm-shifting solution that's going to save the day, totally different than anything else in the world for this thing. And then finally, we have the traits and skills on our band of merry thieves. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I have all three personas of the people that we need. Or maybe it's two of us, maybe it's three of us, maybe it's five of us. But we have the traits and skills of the people that need to design, build, and sell the solution that's going to win. That's the framework in a nutshell. And that's the whole pitch.
Okay, very helpful. So let's work backwards. The team and their traits. I think too often when founders and even salespeople show up, they're typically doing feature function dumps, and they're using the CV or the resume as the pitch. No one cares. What is it that makes for a good team in the eyes of an investor?
So there are different ways to describe it. I've stolen, by the way, a lot of this stuff I've just stolen from other people that are much smarter than me. I try to give them call outs in the author's notes of the book, but like I didn't make this stuff up. This is taken from people that are much smarter than me. The team makeup I've taken from different people. One of them is Dave McClure of 500 Startups, a little bit of a problematic person, but came up with a brilliant way to describe this. He describes the three personas on the founding entrepreneurial team of a startup. And those three personas are the hacker, the hustler, and the hipster. Or what I would say, the person who's going to design it, the person who's going to build it, and the person who's going to sell it. The person who's going to sell it is the leader. That's usually the CEO. of the company. Titles are not so interesting to me. I want to know about roles. So do we have the three personas on the founding team? I've invested in companies where there was one founder, but she had all three personas. She was the one who could design it, she was the one who could build it, and she was incredibly articulate and able to explain it clearly and raise the money and sell it to the initial customers. She had the whole package. So it doesn't have to be one person, but we have to see those three personas: who's going to design it, who's going to build it, who's going to sell it. And these can be B plus players. They can fire themselves and hire their replacements when the company gets more money. But I need to know that they can get a basic thing out of the door and in front of customers or users or whatever in a relatively short period of time. So those are the three personas and the roles, the role division among the team. But they also have to have the credibility to back that up. When they tell us that they've got those personas, well, prove it. I worked at Google. Okay, but I don't know what you did at Google. If I see Google on the slide, the logo, I don't necessarily know what you did there. So it's not just the logo pedigree or the degrees. I went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge. Okay, that's great, but what did you learn there? Who did you study under? Were you in a different field of study that's not relevant to this company? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck on the pretty pictures on the slide, which doesn't interest me, or the logos on the slide, which interests me, but I need to know more, or the degrees that they have, or the universities that they studied at, or the prior jobs that they had. But I need to know more. I need to know more credibility about, A, do you have credibility for this subject matter? And B, do you have credibility for these roles that you've divided? Have you ever sold anything before? Have you ever built anything before? And it could be that this is your first time, and that's fine. But tell me why you believe that you can do this if you've never done it before. So those are some of the basic questions that all have to be in that team presentation that are often glossed over or just missing. Again, I think part of the problem, I think we're going to get into like empathy and things like that. I think part of the problem with entrepreneurs is that they assume that if we've invited them into a meeting, that we trust them and we are tending to believe them. I will see 100 startups before investing in one. Our inclination is probably to pass much more often than to invest. So the fact that we've invited a founder or a team in for a meeting means that we're curious and we're interested, but it doesn't mean we're inclined yet to trust them or believe them. They have to prove that. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs take that for granted in the interaction with an investor. They assume that if they were asked to present, then the investor is just going to blindly believe anything they claim. There's still a need to back it up with credibility.
Well, I was having lunch with some friends earlier on this week, and one of them said that private equity, more than venture capital, but private equity exists to service the greed and ambition of founders. And I think one of the qualities of your villain of the piece in the book is that he plays trust and greed beautifully. So let's explore that a little bit, because I think for many founders, they're terribly naive in terms of understanding the investment world.
Yeah. Well, let's not put down the VCs and the private equity. We have tons of greed as well. So we've all got greed. We're all motivated by greed. I think one of the funny things that I tried to do in the book, if you really notice carefully, there's a line deeper into the book when the entrepreneur meets a venture capitalist, and she uses almost exactly the same language as the mafioso earlier in the book. And I'm trying to say, like, sometimes we venture capitalists can talk a lot like mafia bosses, and that's a little bit of a joke, but it's also kind of a sad reality too. We often behave not that much dissimilarly from a mafia, family boss, and that's not good either. So I think there's greed on both people. Capitalism rewards motivation. Capitalism rewards ambition, and ambition often is driven by either fear or greed. Healthy greed is okay. I want to make more money for my family, for myself, for my investors. It's all good. The founder and the VC or the investor both have to match and align their greed for a common cause, which is going to reward both of them if this thing works out. So I don't have a problem with greed with a lowercase g. I have a problem with greed with a capital G, which gets people into trouble. But some healthy motivation to get more out of capitalism is good, and that's why we're all here. So I'm trying to highlight in the book like where it goes astray a little bit, where people get a little bit too far over their skis, a little bit too greedy, and get into trouble without spoiling who that happens to. So it can go too far, but a certain amount of healthy ambition is fine.
There's also a juxtaposition when one's going for funding or talking to investors between the greed and ambition and then the empathy and trustworthiness. Let's explore that side of things.
Yeah. So I think like with anything in life, you need a balance. If you tip too far to one side on almost anything, you get into trouble. So the entrepreneur needs to balance lots of things. Entrepreneurship is a balancing act among many things: work, life, ambition, reality, dream, reality. Hustle, but also organization. Um, the great entrepreneurs are able to maintain that balance and not let themselves tip too far to one side or the other. If you get too dreamy and you're not rooted in reality, you're going to lose because you don't actually build anything. Or if you're so detail focused and you're having organizational meetings every week when you're three people in a co-working space, well, you're probably wasting your time. You probably need to be dreaming a little more and hustling a little more and breaking some things first. So that balance is very difficult. And in specifically in the case of the pitch, the entrepreneur, he or she needs to keep in mind that there's a balance between what I know and what I believe about what I'm doing and what the investor doesn't yet know and doesn't yet believe about what I'm doing. And we have to maintain that balance. So I'm providing information to get the investor closer to where I already am. So the metaphor I use is the train leaving the station. Usually a pitch just starts off like a rocket ship or a train speeding out of a station. And unfortunately, the investors are still back at the station because they have all these lingering questions. And the entrepreneur is off to the races and the train is 3 stations down. And the investor is looking at her phone or her email or kind of spacing out because they're still bothered by a ringing in the ears of these questions that they have. So we want to try to maintain that balance all the time. I'm going to give you a couple points. Are you with me? Great. Let's move forward. Do you have any questions? Okay. This balance of providing information and engaging with the investor is part of the dance. And I think it's very important. And that gets to empathy. It's very hard. And I appreciate it when you're deeply passionate about something and you've already convinced yourself that this is the future of our industry. The empathy part is to put yourself in the shoes of the listener and say, oh, I have to remember they're not there yet. They probably don't believe what I believe yet. They probably don't even know what I know yet. So I need to keep bringing them along empathetically to where I am. I've seen the future and I'm coming back from the future. Like Mike Maple says, the great entrepreneurs, I've seen the future. They're coming back to tell us about what they've seen. But remember that we haven't seen that future yet. So we need to be brought along more empathetically with more patience and a little more information without the hand waving and the over the top hubris yet, because we're just not there yet.
Well, again, the rule applies in sales as well. You meet your customer where they are, not
Yeah.
where you wish they were. And if you're rushing ahead, if you're making assumptions, you're going to lose most of your audience very quickly. Um, and then you spend your time in justification and defending, which
Yeah.
is the worst possible place to be. What we're trying to do is create an ally as opposed to an adversary and or an accomplice. And I think a great analogy is to get the goalkeeper to come out of the goal. So it's you and them kicking into an open goal with no obstacle. So
Yes.
you're working side by side. And I think too often there's a them versus us dynamic that's being set up right out of the gate because of how the founder shows up. So what advice would you give to founders to make sure that they're actually turning investors into allies, not adversaries?
Yeah. So it's, somebody said to me when they read the book, oh, this framework is basically, it's very similar to sales methodology. And I said, no, it is sales methodology. Like I borrowed this from, among other things, sales frameworks that have been in existence for quite a while. Sandler, which I think you're familiar with, or Dale Carnegie, or whoever, they're using similar frameworks. I'm just translating that because this founder, he's also selling. He's selling his shares in his company to an investor who's going to purchase them. It's a sale. So sales are all about understanding, the customer discovery, understanding the customer's position, uh, surfacing objections before you even, blast them with the solution. You got to understand what their objections are likely to be or are. That's what we're doing in this framework. It's the same idea. So, to try to answer your question succinctly, it's about the advice to the founder if they want to engage with the investor is to try to anticipate and mirror what's happening in that investor's brain. It's not, unfortunately, not about the way you want to present it. It's about the human on the other side wants to hear it. It's the same information. It's just structured a little bit differently because you're trying to, like you said, bring that investor out of the goal so you can both shoot at the goal together. Or the way I would describe it is you're trying to anticipate what the red neurons are, the negative neurons are that are lighting up in their brain, and either disable them as soon as they pop up, or the ninja move is to disable them even before they pop up. So your presentation is structured in a way where it has already anticipated a lot of the early objections or the big issues that the investor is going to be wondering about. You're addressing them in like a ninja or jujitsu, Kyoshu jitsu, which is about finding the pressure points in the human body. You're hitting those pressure points even before the investor like gets to those questions, and it's very disembodying. It's an amazing experience when someone's able to do that to you. Again, it's not manipulation. It's just working with the investor to provide the information in the way he or she wants to hear it, in the order they want to hear it, and the investor feels so happy when the information is presented that way. Another metaphor is like, we surveyed before I wrote the book. We surveyed a whole bunch of VCs. I just wasn't sure if I was correct that there even was a problem. And over 82% of the investors that we surveyed said that on average, the pitches they receive are poorly organized. And I said to somebody, it's like 82% of singing contest judges saying that on average, the people coming to these contests are singing out of tune. Like, it's incredibly frustrating for the judges after a while. If 82% of the time they're saying these songs are not, the people can't even sing properly in tune. So again, I'm not putting down founders, but they just assume that they can sing and then any song they sing is going to be resonant. It's not. So we're just saying, okay, here's how to sing it in tune. And as a judge, that's very pleasing. When the song is sung in tune, I may not like the song, but at least I appreciate that it was sung in tune. And that's where we're trying to get to the entrepreneur too.
So, what advice can we give to founders to think as the investor, and what preparation must they do in order to ensure that they're pitching it in tune in a way that the investor is going to enjoy?
Well, that isn't that like a hanging pitch to me? Like that I wrote. So I would say, take my framework. Trust me, this is the way the normative investor's brain, and it's very provocative. Like I have to, it's almost arrogant. Like this guy, Ben Wiener, claims that most investors' brains are working this way. But again, we did a lot of surveying before. I did a lot of research. I really believe that on average, this is the way most investors' brains are processing these new pitches. And we're just saying, just use this framework to mirror that. It's probably you still may not win, but it's going to be a lot more pleasing to the investor. It's going to elicit from them better questions. They're going to be more engaged. I can't guarantee you're going to raise money. Most startups don't raise money, but this is going to help you have a better chance because it's going to be working with the investor's brain subconsciously, the way their brain operates. So the advice would be, I think that I have a framework for this specific narrow slice of our world, which is entrepreneurs pitching investors for money. I think that typically the average person, the average investor, assuming the investor has a brain, if you're a founder, you will meet some investors who don't have a brain. I apologize for that, and there's nothing I can do about that. But assuming that you do meet an investor who has possession of a brain, this is probably the way their brain works. You have a better chance of resonating with them with this framework. That's all. It's a claim of increasing the odds. It's not a guarantee of success.
I'm going to assume that the hypothesis is how, in the first 5 minutes, the investor creates the conditions for the founder creates the conditions for the investor to feel safe enough to follow them through.
Yeah.
Um, you've sat through thousands of pitches. So when you sense that moment when an investor finally leans in, what usually triggers it? What changes in the founder's tone or story?
Well, I'll try to answer that different ways. I want to dispel some myths. I want to get people comfortable who are listening because I think some people may still be worried, like, wait, I'm not a good speaker. I'm not dynamic. I'm not a great presenter. That's not what this is about at all. In fact, this is really best for those people who feel that they're not great presenters because all I'm saying is you could be the most dry, straight shooting scientist, like the guy in my book, and just read, just pronounce it. It's like in this way, and it's going to get into the head of the person listening. So I, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think when you meet the investor, like you said, when you meet the investor where they are, when you're presenting the information according to the way their brain is working, it's a very calming, engaging, exciting feeling for the investor. A, because unfortunately it's rare. They appreciate the work that you've done to help them understand this newfangled thing that you're presenting, and it creates this bond of engagement right away, which is magical on both sides when you feel it. And so we're just trying to be helpful there and get you to that place where the two of you can connect and hopefully partner together and ride off into the sunset to make a lot of money together or to save the world or whatever this venture is trying to do.
Well, let's look at the opposite side and draw on your own personal story when you were cursed out by the investors.
Yeah.
What was it that you did that triggered that visceral, hostile reaction?
I only understood it afterwards when I thought about it. There were two different things that I was doing wrong, uh, and partially doing right that caused that visceral reaction. So the greatest ideas, Howard Marks, the legendary investor, says the best ideas are those that are non-consensus but right. So ipso facto, by definition, if you are working on something that is non-consensus, that might be the most amazing thing about it is that no one else has thought about it yet because they didn't think it was possible or that it was too good to be true or nobody ever thought of it. But the point is, the best ideas are the ones that are a little bit provocative and that people haven't really tried or tried and failed. So if you are one of those subset of people working on something that is non-consensus but also right, that's incredibly exciting, and those are the ones that produce the greatest outcomes. But B, equally, they're probably going to get people upset because a lot of people are in the status quo and are not going to readily believe that this non-consensus thing is actually right. So sometimes they get so upset that they actually curse you out. So of the two people that cursed me out, one of them actually became one of my biggest backers. I of course could not have dreamed that at the time, but he was a sarcastic wife. He's now like a brother to me, and I'm also very sarcastic. But he was incredibly sarcastic in a crowded room. I'm making my pitch, and he just kind of yells out, "Okay, I'm calling you out. This can't possibly be true. You're full of Schlitz and not the beer." And it's very shocking. Now he got a great laugh from the crowd because, by the way, I think a lot of people were thinking that, but nobody had the guts to say that out loud. And what I had done wrong was I was so passionate and so excited about what I was doing, it was early on, that I had glossed over bringing, I think, a little more evidence before I started, before I introduced my hero. I had gone right into the hero, like, here's the opportunity and it's so amazing, but I hadn't set it up properly where nobody believed that there could possibly even be an opportunity or a need for that hero to come riding in. So I was that quintessential person who like takes off with the train and I'm off 3 stations before, and everyone's still back. And this guy was back on the station saying, no, this can't possibly be right. And I hadn't brought enough. So my pitch was structured improperly. I was able to schedule a follow-up call with him. And then, being a little wiser to his attitude, I must have, I don't know exactly what I did, but clearly I started off, I front loaded it with a lot of evidence and data and the beginnings of this framework of setting it up and then representing. And he was obviously much more interested and became one of my biggest backers. The second person who cursed me out for different reasons, because he was a very rude. Turned out he was Canadian. I think I found the world's only rude Canadian. I pitched him over the phone. I was introduced to him by another investor. I started pitching him, and he just cut me off and said, "Wait, before you even go further, what's your?" In my case, it was, "What's your selection process?" And I started to fumble, and I told him what my process was, and he cut me off again. He said, "You are an effing idiot. You don't know what the f you're doing. You clearly have no clue." And what was magical was he then, before he hung up, and he hung up very quickly afterwards, he like barked a series of instructions at me, like, if you want to take yourself seriously as an investor, you got to do this and this and this and this. Click. And I thought about it. I was like so shocked. You're so disappointed and upset when somebody curses you out. But I actually thought about what he had said, and I thought to myself, you know what? He's right. He had identified a flaw in my process that I was unaware of. And it took somebody cursing me out to shock me into realizing that I needed to fix something. So the first one who cursed me out because it actually proved that I had that provocative idea that was so provocative that people thought it couldn't possibly be true. I just needed to reshuffle my presentation to give them more evidence first before I hit them with the hero. The second one cursed me out because he had properly identified a flaw in my process, and I'm forever indebted to him. I actually, years later, went to Canada for other reasons, and I purposely had a meeting with him. He's like, "What?" He showed up late for the meeting. It was classic, and he said, "What do you want to meet with me about? I didn't even invest in your fund." And I said, "Sir, I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude." He goes, "For what? What did I do for you?" I said, "You remember that conversation? I didn't say you cursed me out, but I said you gave me a series of instructions, and I used them, and I've become a different investor because of them." He was shocked. It was like, I don't think anybody ever said a nice thing to him in his life, and I really meant it sincerely. I have gratitude to anybody who teaches me anything, even if they do so while cursing me out. And those are the two cases. So sometimes the most provocative ideas or the most innovative ideas are going to elicit strong negative reactions, and that could be okay. It actually could be a clue that you're onto something very, very transformative because people are not ready to accept it yet.
Well, that speaks to a lesson that I always teach my clients, which is go running to the sound of gunfire, go looking for bad news, and go seek out people who can prove you wrong. And if you don't, you're not really going to grow. What you'll do is you'll live in a bubble.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic advice.
I just want to give one caveat though. I'm not encouraging people to provoke vulgar reactions to people. It's not a great idea.
Oh,
I'm just saying if it does happen, if somebody reacts strongly to what you're pitching, just recalibrate and say, wait a second, did I pitch it right? Maybe I need to front load it with some more hypothesis, stakes, alternatives before I hit them with my, revolutionary hero. And B, you could actually tap yourself on the back and say, cool, I'm onto something that people don't yet accept. I'm actually on the cutting edge.
so how do you tell the difference between being early and right and being delusional?
You don't tell the difference. The market will tell you. And unfortunately, that's the game of entrepreneurship. I mean, there are plenty. The person who invented the fax. Do you remember fax machines? Like the
Yeah,
person who
yeah.
invented the fax machine was invented in 1940. It didn't become popular until the 1980s. And I have this vision of some old geezer with a cane saying, I invented that thing and nobody gives me any credit. Sometimes you could be 40 years too early. And only the market's going to tell you whether you have product market fit. And that's the terror and the fascination and the incredible challenge and joy of being in the startup land is that you're not going to know until the only one that's going to tell you whether you have product market fit is Mr. Market. And he's really weird and he acts like very strangely and doesn't always give you clues, the right clues early on. Some bozo like me, the investor, just because a bozo like me invests in your company doesn't mean you're going to win or that you have product market fit. The only people that are going to tell you ultimately whether you have product market fit, whether you have that magical non-consensus product that's right, is Mr. Market, and he's bizarre sometimes.
Well, again, one of the most important lessons that I teach my clients is that if you're engaging with somebody, make sure you've done your research and make sure that you're timely, you're relevant, and you're delivering something that they will consider to be personally valuable. If you're doing anything, if you don't tick all three of those boxes, you're an unwelcome interruption. You're just noise. And investors are being pitched all the time. I don't know what the deal flow is that you're seeing at the moment. I know it's meant to have slowed down a bit, but the reality is that investors are being pitched left, right, and center, and there are founders with their hand out with a begging bowl, who really don't have the right to be there because they're not prepared.
Yeah.
So, in terms of preparing, making sure you're doing your research, what advice would you give there, to make sure that the founder shows up properly equipped?
So that's a great question. I think there are a number of things that founders can do easily, relatively easily, and without a lot of work to make it work. Again, I think, I mean, I don't want to make fun of founders, but we do get emails like "Dear brackets investor" or "Dear Sir or Madam." Like, if you take 2 seconds and look me, if you're sending me an email, don't make it a blast. Don't make it a bulk
Bam.
sir, right? Go to my website. There's a lot of information there. You can see my face. You can see that I'm a man. I'm not a sir or madam. I'm a sir. I self-identify as a sir. And by the way, on my website, there's going to be plenty of information about what I'm looking for. And if you're writing to me from Argentina, I don't invest in Argentina, so please don't bother. It's shocking to me how many inquiries I get from all over the world when my website says very clearly what we invest in and what geographies we look at and what kinds of companies we look for. So take the 2 minutes. Imagine that you're dating and you're trying to get married and you send a bulk email to all the people of the other whoever you're attracted to in your city saying, "Dear sir or madam, would you like to go out with me on a date?" Like that, we would laugh. That'd be ridiculous. But founders are doing that all the time with their startup pitches. So please don't do that. Take a minute to research the sir or madam that you want to go out with on a date. Take a minute to research the sir or madam that you want to pitch for your investment. It's the same thing. In fact, most investor relationships last longer than most marriages today. So it actually could be potentially even more important to take the time to research your potential investor than to research your potential spouse, because you can get rid of your spouse if you make a mistake. You can't get rid of your investor if you make a mistake. Those are jokes about investing and marriage, but seriously, take the time. It doesn't take a long time to figure out whether and write an individual message. But let's take a step back. Maybe even before you write that message, the delta between or the difference in value between a warm intro and a cold intro is astronomical. So if you really are interested in an investor and you've identified them through some basic research, take a moment and say, wait a second, do I have a way to get to this person before sending him or her a cold tweet or email or LinkedIn request? And odds are that you do. And those are far more valuable and going to get you to the top of the pile because we're humans. It just happens. We are humans. Plenty of us will take cold intros, but frankly, if somebody that I trust and know tells me, "Hey, Ben, you should take a look at this startup," I'm just going to pay a little more attention to it. It's just the way human brains work. So, step one is try to earn some credibility even before you meet the person. Step two is do the research about the person and see if they really are potentially a fit for you, and then make a decision about whether you want to cold reach out or try to find another way to get to them. I think those are the two primary ways to prepare even before the pitch so that you know more about what you're getting into.
And how does an investor know when they are ready to go for funding? Because I think very often investors are premature and they're going for funding as oxygen, not fuel.
You mean the founders are going out for?
Founders, sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, founders.
So there are investors for every stage of entrepreneurship. They're just harder to find earlier on. So I am what I call a day zero investor. I want to find in my geographic market before everybody sends me cold emails. Look at our website and see what we invest in. But in my local city where I invest, I want to be the very first money into that startup. I actually don't want there to be a company. I don't want there to be a product. I want to invest 2 or 3 times a year in two people, a dog, and an idea in a garage. That makes me a little bit unique because I'm the first one in line. Most professional investors actually want to wait a little bit and de-risk, and that's fine. But just as a founder, you need to understand, is it a Ben Wiener day zero type who actually wants to get my pitch when it's very raw and early? Or is it a Series A or Series B, later stage VC who wants to see, I don't know, a couple $1 million in revenue or usage or things like that? Then don't bother reaching out to them because it's probably, too early for them. So again, most investors make it known what stages or what types of maturity of companies or ventures they want to look at. It takes 2 seconds to figure it out, do the research, and then whittle down your list to the subset of investors that are relevant for your stage. I think that's the first order of business because there are investors for any stage, whether they're FFF, friends, family, and fools who will back you just based on an idea, or somebody like me who will compete with them and back you just based on an idea. I love to do that. I do it only a couple times a year, but there are those magic moments when I do connect with what they're doing and I want to get in first.
Fascinating. Okay, so if we come back to the book, um, a lot of what you talk about is truth, timing, and trust. So that can be quite a lonely place for both investor and founder. Um, in the book, you seem to capture that loneliness rather well. And I'm curious what your story was there. Did you feel isolated and alone, or did you feel like you were screaming into the wind?
I think, Ben Horowitz, whose book is on my shelf, the famous investor Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, has a quote where he says, "When I was an entrepreneur, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 3 hours crying." Like it is it is an exceptionally lonely place. Entrepreneurship is really not for everybody. It's You have to be a little bit crazy, and you have to be ready for a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation, a lot of doubt. Um, and when I invest in founders, a lot of the times the first timers have these moments of like tremendous. You're really oscillating wildly between, even in a successful one, there are plenty of very dark times, and I'm very pleased when they call me. I want to be their trusted, advisor, and you have to sort of play psychiatrist sometimes because they'll call like in a panic, like, "Oh my God, this is crazy. I'm so worried," and you have to say often, "Yeah, A, I appreciate that you are talking to me, but B, that's totally normal," and happens to even the greatest ones that you read about in the on the news who are extremely successful had these dark moments in their journey, and we're here to help you, and here's how we can help navigate it, and let's try to work through it this way or that way. It's totally normal to feel isolated and alone. In my book, I tried to amp it up a little bit because I'm trying to highlight some of these classic mistakes, and he forces it again without giving away too much of the story. But you see that he's making some mistakes. He's a very well-meaning founder. He's highly educated. He went to Harvard. He's highly credentialed, but it's his first time doing a startup, and he begins to suspect too much of almost everybody around him. His wife, his co-founder. He tends to tilt towards isolation and suspicion of other people when possibly he should be a little more trusting at times. He doesn't have the right balance. If you're really following this character through the book, he's imbalanced on a whole bunch of things on purpose. I set him up in imbalance because he has to get to balance later on in the book. And again, I'm not giving away the ending. There's still some twists at the end, as you probably saw, but obviously he's going to get some of that stuff back in balance. And I'm trying to give a teaching tool about some of those sub themes also. Trust of your spouse, trust of your partner. When should you suspect them, and when should you tend to believe that they're actually trying to help you? Um, it gets tricky, and it's real. That struggle is real, and we've all gone through it. So I guess it's just a shout out to the entrepreneurs and the people that work with them and love them. Like, yeah, it happens all the time. There's going to be these imbalances, and hopefully this book helps like guide a little bit through what those look like and how to get back onto track.
I think the fact that your main protagonist, Mark, is so flawed, um, it certainly reflects real life. I'm curious, did you model it, Mark, on anybody specifically, or was it a whole raft of founders or yourself?
Yeah, there's a little bit of me in there, but obviously nothing like that ever happened to me. But the beginnings of what happened to him happened to all of us. So I've just taken them to extreme results, which gets him into all sorts of trouble. But a lot of those initial suspicions or mistakes in judgment or self belief or things like that, we do that all the time. So there's autobiographical stuff in there to the extent that anybody who's ever tried to do something new has encountered some of the stuff that Mark encounters. If you're asking me from an actual character building who he's modeled after, it's not an individual person. I did once meet a founder who was a chemist who reminded me a little bit of Mark, but I wasn't what he was working on wasn't what Mark was doing. He's also modeled a little bit, believe it or not. There's a theme that I think a lot of people didn't catch in the book, where there's a couple shout outs to the famous novel The Count of Monte Cristo. And Mark Edmund, his name is Edmund because I'm sort of shouting out to Edmond Dantes, who is the protagonist in The Count of Monte Cristo. And so there's a little bit of Dantes in Edmund, in my Edmund, because he's going through a similar crazy journey of like people turning against him and trying to save himself and getting to a treasure. Again, it deviates somewhat, but the mafioso in the book smokes a Monte Cristo on purpose because I use that brand of cigar as like a shout out to the book. I didn't want to hide it. I wanted to say, hey, those people noticing, there's a little bit of hints of that storyline in this story. Obviously, I didn't track the whole thing, but there were a couple Easter eggs or shout outs to things that inspired me. And that book was one of the things that inspired me about it, this journey. That book was written hundreds of years ago. It's an amazing, iconic novel. Uh, Alexandre Dumas did an amazing job of like getting the narrative arc totally nailed. And I tried to give him a shout out in my book.
Excellent. It's striking how often Mark lies to himself before he lies to others. Is that what you see in many founders? Not deliberate deceit, but a hefty dose of self-deception born of fear and exhaustion.
I love that you said it that way. It's really well articulated, and that's 100% right. And again, it's about balance. So a founder does need to self-delude somewhat because they're trying to do something that has not yet been done, that they believe they can do, that there's no complete proof that can be done, and they believe that customers or whoever will buy the stuff in the future. So there has to be some aspirational, some healthy dose of self-delusion, what Steve Jobs described, or what people described about him as the reality distortion field. That he was amazing at creating that reality. So that is a both a positive, but a negative if it goes too far. So what happens with Mark in the beginning of the book is that he's gone a little bit too far. He's so convinced about the specific things that he needs to get the investor's money, and that's where he's making a mistake. He knows he needs to get something, but he's got the wrong idea about what he needs to get. So he's not wrong for being somewhat self-delusional. Like, if I get something, then it could work. But the if I build it, they will come is a little bit miscalibrated in his case, and he needs to be smacked in the face or worse a bunch of times to realize what he actually does need to do to get that future to activate. So a small dose, a healthy dose of self-delusion is actually required. I don't want to make fun of anybody, but like somebody who's been an accountant or a statistician for their career might not make a great startup founder because they might not have enough of that dreamy muscle in their brain to get them to self-delude to chase crazy things. They might just be too conservative. So you can tip too far. You can be too conservative and too cautious, or you can be wildly self-delusional and then trip and make a bunch of mistakes. The point is to try to reach some sort of balance where you have one foot in reality and one foot in dreamland, and keep yourself oscillating in balance between both of them.
Well, another thing that I noticed is that in the book, um, you've got two levels. You've got excitement and sickness operating in parallel. Um, how much of the fever in modern startup culture do you think comes from founders performing certainty instead of earning trust?
I'm not sure how much of the mistakes are based on certainty. Is that what you mean?
Well, you just see that there's a culture in modern startup businesses,
Yeah,
which is it's about the grind, it's about trying to scale, and that there seems to be this pathway
yeah,
that so many founders have been sold the story of, but they don't really seem to have connected with the human beings in their own organization, their suppliers, their partners, their peers, and so on. And there's that dichotomy at play in the book.
yeah. Um, I don't know if this will be a satisfactory answer, but I think that part of the problem in analyzing your question is assuming that there is a way. And I think a lot of us VCs are responsible for getting people mistaken into believing that there is a way. So, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was the lean startup by Eric Ries and Steve Blank, and that was like one methodology. And then people claimed, oh, that's been replaced. I just saw an article this week about this, that one of my colleagues wrote an article saying, well, it used to be lean startup, and then it was replaced by, blitz scaling and grow at all costs. And now maybe we may be returning to lean startup, 2.0. And I'm thinking, it's not that simple. For some startups, blitzscaling may still be the way to do it. And for other startups, lean startup or some other alternative strategy might be the way to do it. If there was one way to do it, then this would be easy. Startups are hard, and there's lots of different ways to get to product market fit, and it has to match the personalities of that company and the market that they're selling into. There's not one way. There's not one way to create culture in a startup. There's not one way to deal with customers. It's got to, like you said, it has to be a human thing between the humans in the company and the humans. For as long as we're still selling to humans, I mean, AI chatbots or agents are going to take over this world and harvest us for our kidneys and rule us. But until then, we are still humans selling to humans. And like you said, it has to take the shape of the specific humans that are in the company and the specific humans that they're talking to. And that shape can be very different. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to growing a startup and creating the right culture for customer interaction. I think it really evolves and should evolve based on the people involved. So it's not a satisfactory answer because what I'm saying is there isn't one way. There's multiple ways. And part of the recognition of founders is you got to make your own way that works for you and your company and the customers and partners that you're working with. And don't take one of these books as gospel, like this is the way to go because some famous VC in Silicon Valley published a best-selling book that this is like the new way. It might be the way for Silicon Valley. It might not be the way for you. There's multiple ways to do it.
We're coming into the final furlong of the episode. So I want to come back to this concept of truth over theatre. What's the difference between a founder who performs belief and one who embodies it?
Well, that's the answer, right? Somebody who performs even an investor with half a brain is going to see through that very quickly. Um, Most investors have a pretty good sense of when somebody's BSing them, or being overly excited or overly uh, drunk on hubris, um, before it's earned, and that's a big turnoff for most investors. So I always advocate when I speak about this framework. One of the first slides I put up is I just want to make it crystal clear. This is not about manipulation. This is not about performance. This is about being truthful at all times and just taking your truthful message and structuring it the right way so it's going to resonate with the person listening. I'm never advocating being not truthful. It's about taking your truthful message but just restructuring it in a way that's going to activate the right neurons in the investor's mind at the right time. But this is not about manipulation. This is about being truthful at all times. Because if you have that amazing thing that is non-consensus and right, then it's a treasure. You're not coming, like you said, like a couple minutes ago about the investors, the founders coming hat in hand. No, no, no. Don't think about yourself that way. If you have that amazing treasure that's non-consensus and right, that's going to change the world and change your market and make a lot of money or make people happier and healthier, that's an asset that you have that you should be very proud of. Not too proud, but somewhat proud enough to represent it truthfully without over exuberance, without over embellishment. Just say what you got and what you're going to do. And if you do that in the right structure, you're going to capture the right investor for your company.
In the book, there's a lot of self-critique about the VC profession, and it's kind of like two kinds of faith colliding. If you had to sum up the moral of Fever Pitch in one sentence, what do you want founders, investors, and readers to walk away believing?
In one sentence, I would say that I believe in the best founders. I believe that the world is driven on entrepreneurship. We need these people to succeed. And I believe that there's a misperception on how to present that information to the, unfortunately, to the gating factors, which is us, the people that give the money to the startups. There's a misperception in how to do that. And I believe that I've proposed an alternative way to do it that is going to increase the chances of success. Not guarantee, but increase the chances of success in that critical, unfortunate interaction between the founder that doesn't have enough money and the investors that have the money and are looking for the right thing to back. That's all I believe. I believe that we need these people to succeed, and I believe in them, and I want to give them an extra set of tools to be better suited and better armed for that confrontation and to come out, victorious.
Finally, then, you've turned a decade of scar tissue into a story that teaches through emotion, not instruction. What's next for you? Is Fever Pitch a one-off, or are you planning to keep building this universe, maybe through other books or even founder-based training on these lessons?
So the first order of business for me is to teach this. I want to get this out into the world and get it into the hands of as many founders as possible because this I feel is my, one of the few things that I figured out in life, and I want to share it. So I'm very busy. I'm very focused on that. And by the way, I have a day job of investing in and working with the startup companies in my portfolio, which is by far my first priority. So this is like already like a side hobby for me and just a gift back to the industry. So my primary focus outside of my regular, so 120% of my work time is on my venture capital fund, and the other 30% is on promoting this framework for the time being. And I've invested a lot into it. So we'll talk about how to get it, but you don't need to buy the book to get this. Like I'm giving it away for free. If you enjoy a good book, it's a fun way to digest it. But I've published free material on the framework itself. You can get that for free. I'm not trying to force people to buy the book. And even if they do buy the book, I'm giving the proceeds away to charity. So this is not about me becoming rich and famous off the book. I plan to become, successful from the venture capital work. But so my primary focus on this. If I have another thing that I want to teach, then I would probably try to write it again through a story. I don't know if I have another thing to teach. I have some ideas about things that I think I might have sorted out, but they're still in formation. If I do, I may take a. It was fun. It was a lot of work, but it was fun to write it. I may do it again, but I don't have something specific on the horizon that I
Okay.
want to translate into another novel.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, first of all.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the conversation about it.
The book's a mirror, not a manual, really, and most people avoid mirrors. Where can listeners get hold of Fever Pitch, and where should founders go if they want to learn from your work or to pitch your fund?
Thank you. So I really want people to go to the book and to the materials. That's feverpitchbook.com, feverpitchbook.com. That you'll get links there to buy the book if you want to. It's on Amazon or wherever else books are sold online. But more importantly, you can also take a right turn at that webpage, feverpitchbook.com, or also the links to the free materials. So we've published an interactive playbook that gives you the slides, gives you annotated and interactive commentary on each of those slides, like why these slides are important, what should be on or off these slides. And at the end, there's some further links and resources and materials. So it really shoved a lot of the core learnings into this free material. And there's even a generator at the end, not AI, but the opposite, a question, like a form for the founder to keep filling out that's heavily character constrained to extract from them the core juice of their HEART pitch. And that spits out text that really, in my opinion, is the elevator pitch. Like that is the pitch of your startup. And you can use that in a demo day or expand it into your verbal pitch, et cetera. So all that stuff is free. It's all available at feverpitchbook.com. Like I said, I invest only in one city in the world, which is very far away. It's unlikely that anybody listening is going to be relevant for our fund, but the fund is at jumpspeed.vc, and you can see more about the companies that I've invested in and the specific focus that I have there.
Brilliant. Ben, thank you so much. And really enjoyed your candor and for showing the truth beneath the theatre. So thank you, Ben Wiener.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you found this useful, then please like, comment, and share with maybe a founder who could do with improving their story and tightening up their messaging. And definitely get the book. It's well worth a read. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.